Can you hear me? Okay. I hope this isn't too loud. Let me know if it does. Is it okay? All right. Greetings and welcome to our community forum today. We ask you to come forward and sit in the front, if you will, or in the middle of the rows. We appreciate your help with this. My name is Marlene Blatnick-Fries. I'm the coordinator of today's forum titled Real Estate, Frank Talk on Sales, Housing Issues, and the Future. Given this subject, we hope to challenge you with new information or perspectives on issues that you'll continue to think about and perhaps even act on. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe in the continuing search for the truth and importance of serving others. We organize these forums as a congregational service. Is it going out again? Hi. Okay. As a congregational service. We organize these forums as a congregational service to the community to support personal reflection, social action, and encourage individual and collective growth for all who attend. We chose today's topic because it's almost 10 years since the start of the mortgage crisis in 2007, which had a devastating impact on our communities. So where do we stand today in the real estate recovery process? What are the future challenges? We are fortunate, though, to have in our community an urban visionary that can help answer some of these questions. So I would like to introduce Jim Rackauckas, Vice President of the Western Reserve Conservancy and Director of Thriving Communities Institute. He is one of the nation's leading experts on the foreclosure crisis and neighborhood revitalization. He served for 19 years on the Cleveland City Council, where he chaired the Finance Committee. And in 1997, Jim took office as Cuyahoga County Treasurer, where he was among the first public officials to warn of the foreclosure crisis, and that was in 2001. He received his undergraduate degree from Oberlin College and his Juris Doctorate degree from John Marshall School of Law. So it's with great pleasure that I present Jim. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you. Can you hear me? I'm not using this mic, I'm using this. You hear me? Yeah. Okay, and I'll talk loudly. So I always chuckle when I hear, no offense to you, but when I hear terms like national leader, visionary, I consider myself an urban plotter because we've been at this a long time. And it's very difficult. You've been at it a long time and you don't like the results. But I think the message today hopefully will be somewhat more hopeful than it has been in the past. So yes, 19 years in City Council, 14 years as County Treasurer. I spent a lot of time traveling the state, and it's amazing how many people know about what happened up here in 2008, 9, and 10. And I always have to tell them I was not one of those under investigation. But anyway, so it was quite a mess, and I don't miss politics as much as I thought I would. In fact, Jay Westbrook has come to work for me, and he was going through a real withdrawal when he left City Council and came to work with us in the St. Luke's neighborhood. And I said, give it time, you'll get over it. It's a withdrawal problem, you'll be fine. So anyway, I don't know how many of you know about the work of the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. I see some hands I was talking about with Kelly. They're an amazing organization. When I was getting ready to leave government, I was introduced to Rich Cochran back in introduced to Rich in 2008. At Corky and Lenny's, what began as a 1-hour breakfast lasted from 8 till 1 o'clock. We were sitting at the same table. We went from breakfast to lunch as we talked about what they did, because I'm a city kid. I knew nothing about what the Land Conservancy did. He wanted to learn more about urban issues, and actually I met him to engage his support in helping to pass the Ohio County Land Bank bill. So when I joined him in 2000, it's a nonprofit organization. They pulled off the largest merger in the history of nonprofits in this country when they merged a number of nonprofits together, 8 in fact, land trust organizations in 2006, and they've added an additional 6. They protect natural and working lands. And I was telling Kelly earlier, one of the things I enjoy most is in emails about once every other week, once every third week, one of our land preservation folks will announce they've just conserved an additional 200 acres or 300 acres or 500 acres. And then they do a history of the land, the ownership, the kinds of biological issues, what kind of plants are on the property, what kind of wildlife. It's just so much fun, and they're great people. So we started obviously it was never really an urban mission, but when I joined them, it was to begin an urban mission at the Land Conservancy and move the land bank concept from Cuyahoga County only, to the other counties that make up the Land Conservancy footprint. And that included counties that had cities like Youngstown and Warren and Lorain and Elyria and Akron and Canton. All of those all those have land banks now. So we began to establish county land banks, and then shortly after we began to establish them in Northeast Ohio, we began to get calls from all over the state of Ohio. You'll see a map shortly that will show you how far our reach is extended. And it became clear to me as I began to set these up, and I always tell the story, my first meeting, one of my first meetings was with the mayor of Youngstown, not the one who's in trouble now, but the one who was in trouble a couple of times ago. And he said to me, Youngstown's had their problems too, and he said to me, as I was explaining land banks, he cut me off and he said, "You have money for demolition?" And I started to give him a tortured answer about how this, and he cut me off, he said, "Look, if you don't have money to help me take down abandoned homes in Youngstown, and there are thousands of them," he said, "it's like giving me a new car with no gas. It's nice to look at, but it doesn't take me anywhere." So we immediately began the search for demolition and rehabilitation money, specifically demolition money. And you're going to see shortly we've really had a good degree of success in impacting state and federal policies in the area of demolition. So Ohio's challenges, and geez, as I travel the state, I was last week in 5 southern Ohio, Appalachian Ohio River counties. It's no different there. It's the challenges were predatory lending. When they started making bad loans in Cleveland, they were making them in Dayton and Toledo, and then they learned they can make them in rural areas as well. Those loans resulted in foreclosures, a staggering loss of home equity, which we'll talk about in a little, declining population, which is a real problem as we talk about trying to repurpose abandoned properties. And there are many of them. There are fewer here because of the work that's gone on in Cuyahoga County. Crime and drugs, it's not just a Cleveland problem. I was in Portsmouth, Ohio. I've been there a lot lately. It's down in Scioto County. Portsmouth is on the Ohio River, 45,000 people at one time. They had 7,000 people employed in the manufacture of shoes and boots. Well, there's nobody making shoes and boots in Portsmouth, Ohio anymore, and there are not 45,000 people, there's 20,000 people. When the other 25,000 left, they didn't take the houses with them. So there are hundreds of vacant, abandoned properties, horrific drug problem, right down there in this little idyllic town on the Ohio River. Idyllic until you start to work your way back up into neighborhoods. And same problem everywhere, limited demolition funding. It's a chuckle every time I see a certain presidential candidate who says, "I balanced the budgets in Ohio." I always want to raise my hand and say, how did you do that? How did you balance the budgets in Ohio? And it speaks to the last point. The loss of local government funds. You know, Frank Jackson, I know, is approaching voters for increased income tax. If you look at the loss of the estate tax, or as some people call it, the death tax, and local government funding, it's costing Cleveland, I've heard different numbers, certainly 35 to 40 million a year, but it's cost every little community, burg, village, township in Ohio money, and they're all feeling the pinches. So foreclosures, I do this speech in the northern and southern half of the state. When I'm in the southern half of the state, I always say this resembles a ride at Kings Island. Up north, I talk about how it resembles a ride at Cedar Point. So the blue line is Ohio, and as you can see, Cuyahoga County mirrored Ohio very closely in terms of the increase in foreclosures. In a normal year, before this thing took off, and I'm talking about that far end of the roller coaster ride, we averaged about 2,500 foreclosures a year in Cuyahoga County. In our worst year, we topped off at over 14,000. In the state of Ohio, you can see they at one point were up over 90,000. So the impact is not just here in Northeast Ohio, it's all over the state of Ohio, and the damage is evident everywhere. So I don't know if I showed this when I was here last. If I did, you probably forgot, so I'll show it to you again. Remember the show, The Lives and Loves of Dobie Gillis? You're kind of my age, right? You remember. Dwayne Hickman. Remember the movie always playing at the local bijou one movie. It was called The Monster That Devoured Cleveland. That's the only movie they ever showed. And I was a kid, and I said, wow, Cleveland's in the show. It's great. Anyway, I always say this is the monster that devoured Cleveland. So this is 2000. In December of 2000, quick history, we went to the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland and asked for an audience with the Fed governor. Said, look, there's something going on here. They're giving loans to people that don't have jobs. They're giving loans to people that we know are lying on their income statements. The appraisers know it. The banks know it. They should know it. Something's going on. Please help. So as I've said many times, they did help. I had a conference in March of 2001. And then when we asked to go meet with Mr. Greenspan, I think they were amused at the request. We never heard from the Fed again. I get it. That was 2000. As you could see, 2003, and as you probably noticed in the prior slide, it began, as it did in many communities around the country, and in the minority communities where a lot of the lending took off. But it also had some roots on the west side of Cleveland. As you can see, it really picks up in 2003. By 2005, you'll see it's worked into suburbs, and especially East Cleveland, which is so devastated, but you'll see it in places like Garfield and Maple Heights. 2006, it continues to pick up steam. It's really getting bad now in the inner ring suburbs by 2007. This is 8, this is 9, this is 10, and then here's the cumulative impact. There it is. So what areas in Cleveland weren't affected? The Hopkins Airport was not affected by any foreclosures, and the impact is staggering. And at one point, I'm going to jump to a slide. It's going to be the next one. So before I jump, let me just say this. I wasn't sure how to do this. There was a story in the paper today about vacancies in East Cleveland. We always talk about East Cleveland and its fate, and there's just a lot of tough things going on there right now. But the thing that's just so amazing to me is some of the beautiful architecture and some of the apartment buildings. There are 141 vacant and abandoned apartment buildings in the city of East. That's a 14-story building, by the way, a newer one, totaling 1,738 units. So when we talk about the steps we have to take to bring back Cleveland and to bring back places like East Cleveland, it is a harsh message. I know I was talking to Kelly. Why don't we just restore these and bring people back in? And quite frankly, it's because the cost of restoring these far exceeds anything we can ever raise in this environment. I'd like to tell you we could find the $1 billion or so it would take. You can do the math. 1,738 units in these buildings would probably be $150,000 a unit. Do the math. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm in parts of the country. I don't work just here. I've been in Chicago a fair amount, Detroit, which is as distressed. Where there is population gains, you can talk about trying to be more creative, but there are some communities that I think have passed the point of no return. Doesn't mean there can't be a future for communities like this. I just think we have to be realistic, and that's my opinion. I know the blogs love to attack me, and I've had one councilman accuse me of genocide because I helped to raise money to take down houses. But the reality is these buildings are not going to be restored. Let's talk about price sales. There was a story in the Plain Dealer about 3 weeks ago, and I want to show you what kind of happened, and you probably can figure it out based on when the market collapsed. Outer suburbs, I live in Rocky River, and I'm sure for those who live in Beechwood, Rocky River, Beechwood, some communities have, after all these years, they're about where they were, maybe even a little above, so they've survived the crisis. You can see the next line, which is the west inner suburbs. I'm talking Lakewood, North Olmsted, Fairview Park. They've recovered. And then you could look at the other lines. The east inner suburbs, Cuyahoga County, I think because of the strength of the suburbs, has done not as well, but has survived. And then look at the other lines. In particular, look at the bottom line, the east side of Cleveland. The loss of equity on the east side of Cleveland it's absolutely staggering. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I'm sorry, I couldn't find the slide. Let me just tell you this. We're working in Buckeye through a foundation grant at St. Luke's Foundation. In 2004, 2005, the median house sale of a price in the Buckeye neighborhood of Cleveland was $72,000. Last year it was $14,000. It was $14,000. And there are neighborhoods in places like Superior St. Clair where you can't give houses away. Take a look. Look at the decline of value. Now, some would argue the numbers were never real in 2004 and 5 because they were being pumped up by phony sale prices. And I would accept that argument. So take it back to 2000, 2001. Still look at the loss of value. I was at a conference recently in Delaware where we were talking about poverty amongst the elderly in this country and the next big shoe to drop. I heard some numbers that I found staggering. One was the median amount of savings The 65-year-old, you know what the average 65-year-old median amount of savings in this country? $14,000. Two-thirds of the average 65, two-thirds of the net wealth of the average 65-year-old in this country is tied up in the equity of their home. So guess what happened to the equity and the net worth of thousands and thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, millions of people in this country, primarily in minority communities. The estimated, my battery is running low. I don't know how to, can somebody help me? Because I don't know what to do about that. Our technical people resolve that. If not, I can start talking really fast. I've got another. So anyway, there it is. Equity loss, minority communities in the country as a result of the Great Recession, it's estimated at $1.2 trillion. So it's been awful. This is vacancies. You want to, I'll stand out of your way here. Is it not plugged in? Vacancies, take a look at vacancies. And I think we're about to talk, I will. So let me talk to you about how we got to vacancy numbers. Part of the problem we find in cities all over Ohio is not having good data. So you might have seen this in the paper. I know it got a lot of publicity. We ended up working, it's interesting, when I joined the Land Conservancy, I said, you know, I want to know what skill sets you have that work in the country that we could bring to work in the city. And one of them is a GIS department, Geographic Information Systems. It helps our planners map areas that don't really easily get mapped because there aren't grid pattern of streets. But we're able to take data. There's a great system in town called NeoCanDo on every piece of property in Cuyahoga County, put it into the mobile devices, and what we did was, through a grant from the Cleveland Foundation, we sent people out last summer, 16 people, and we inventoried every single property in the city of Cleveland. We literally stood in front of it, we eyeballed it, we photographed it, we did a condition survey. It wasn't as if it was done by the building department. Those were not inspectors. But it gave us the type of the property. We could tell you with almost 99.5% certainty whether or not there are seats up here, whether or not the property was occupied or not. And the nice thing about it was if we weren't sure, there are neighbors out, we were able to ask, is there anybody living here? And then we assigned it a grade, A through F. And it took us 4 months, relatively not problematic. One holdup, it wasn't bad. Other than that, we lost only one iPhone and one device. So here it is, Cleveland Property Survey, and this is by the first time it had been done. So there are 158,000 parcels in the city, almost 159. 112,000 were occupied, 12,179 actually vacant, and almost 28,000 vacant lots. And we determined from the work that we did that these 28,000 lots at one time had houses or buildings on them, parking lots and then parks. So those were the numbers in Cleveland. The good news is, and it's important because there's still 375,000 people that live in the city we call Cleveland, that 85% of the occupied structures are in excellent and good condition. And this is important because with all the blight and all the problems, there's still people that care about their property, they maintain it, and sometimes they get this overwhelming image of only blight, but there are people that care about their property and they take care of it. Only 1,528 structures were rated as deteriorated of those that were occupied, and only 107 in the whole city were rated as unsafe. So there's the breakout. We have a great program. We work with folks out of Detroit, a company called Loveland Technologies. They did the entire city of Detroit. We work with them around other cities. We've done Dayton, Akron, been involved. We're doing another one in Youngstown and Warren, and we did East Cleveland, which was important because of the issues they're facing and the data they needed there. So vacant building, 10% are vacant. As you can see, those that fall in the F category, 14%, 23 in the deteriorated category, fair, good, and excellent. So even those that are vacant, the majority are, I think, worth saving. I would say the 14 and 23% are probably properties that will need to come down. And these are neighborhood results across the city. And it gives you a sense of, you can see the percentage that were coded as vacant, and not surprisingly, neighborhoods like Edgewater, Old Brooklyn, the far west side, very few properties that are vacant. But if you go into areas like Superior, St. Clair, as many as 25% of the properties are vacant. Glenville is really suffering. The map tells the story, and it was the same story, by the way, that was in the Plain Dealer. I think, well, actually, no, that was not, that was a Plain Dealer story when the study was released. But it's on our website. It's available if you're interested in drilling down. Actually, You can go to our website and you can go property by property to determine what properties are graded and how they look. So this informs you a little bit about the work I do. So I started something called the County Land Bank back when I was treasurer in 2007. A group of us, Kermit Lynn, Gus Frangos, and I wrote a bill, Frank Ford. We took to the legislature, introduced in January of '08, passed in December of '08, initially only allowed one county to have a land bank. What is a land bank, by the way? It's created by government, but I want to stress to you, it is not government. It is outside of government. It's a private nonprofit corporation. It's not a county agency. It's incorporated under this section of the law. It's quasi-governmental and committed to a public purpose. So the first bill only allowed Cuyahoga County because I remember it was a state senator from Cincinnati who said he thought this was some sort of, I remember the quote, socialist contraption. Not long after that passed, about a year and a half in, the legislature, because of outcry from us, said, hey, we want one in our county. The bill was amended in 2010 to allow counties over 60,000 in population, and was amended a third time last year to allow every county to have one. So when I got started, the goal was to set them up in Northeast Ohio, but shortly after I started at the Land Conservancy, we got a call from the home of the senator that called it a socialist contraption, Hamilton County. And I got in the car and I probably did 80 miles an hour all the way down to Cincinnati and said, when do we start? And we did organize a land bank in Cincinnati and Hamilton County. And it's taken off around the state. The Land Conservancy has generously allowed me to step outside the boundaries of Northeast Ohio because land banks are a creature of state. They're controlled by state government, so it's critical we have support not just in democratic areas, but in all parts of the state. Everything in blue is where there is, this is where I spent last week. I was in all of these counties last week, and the reason there is interest here has to do with the fact we've been able to raise a fair amount of money that will only go to county land banks. So I think we're at 31 now. I suspect we'll be between 45 and 50. So let's talk about that demolition funding and why I think it's been so important and why I think there has been a growth of land banks. First thing we did, I started in March of 11. We had our eyes on something called the robo-signing settlement. By the way, how much time do I have? Can you, somebody? So I have another 10 minutes? Okay, all right. Started in March of 11. We knew there was a robo-signing settlement in the offing, and that was a lawsuit brought by the 50 state attorneys general against the 5 major banks for massive fraud in the filing of foreclosures. And we approached the Attorney General because we knew most of the money was going to go to borrowers, but every state would get an allocation. So we met with Mike DeWine, and to his credit, because he does deserve credit, I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but on this one, I am forever grateful. Most Attorneys General just simply gave it back to the general fund. And we begged him to not do that. He took a tour with us. We went out and visited some communities. And when he said this is supposed to go to the victims of the foreclosure crisis, it's one of those moments in life you get that big fat pitch and you can't believe it's coming. And we said, that's right. And the victims of the foreclosure crisis still live there, Mr. Attorney General. We visited neighborhoods in Youngstown and Cleveland, and he allocated, of the $93 million he received, he gave this effort $75 million. He hired us, we set up a program. There was a distribution based on foreclosures. Every county got a minimum of $500,000 based on population. Smaller counties like Vinton, 10,000 people didn't get that. And there was a match requirement. Cuyahoga County's total share was $23.1 million. The program closed down in March of 2015 and over 14,600 structures. Words are always, it's funny, we've always debated, you use the word house, you use the word home. Home has a connotation. I like to hate to use blighted and abandoned properties, but they see houses, that's all right. Anyway, over 14,600 were removed. This next one has been fascinating because of the work that was involved in this and how it's worked out for us. At the same time, I was in the Attorney General's office. Within a week, a group of us went to visit the U.S. Treasury Department, and we visited Treasury because with the collapse of the mortgage market back in 2008, 2007, the government really became the mortgage market. The thing they call the GSEs, Fannie and Freddie, had basically collapsed. They were taken over by the feds. And when we went to Treasury in late 2011, at that point, the U.S. government was backstopping 9 out of 10 mortgages were being backstopped by the feds. So we went to the Treasury Department. We met with a guy named Don Graves, who was a Clevelander. He was Undersecretary of Treasury, His father, Dene Graves, is an attorney in town. He's a U.S. boy. He is the chief of staff for Vice President Joe Biden. We went to him. Rich Cochran went to school with him, and we made the pitch and said, whether you realize it or not, you own the vacant property problem. And the room was filled with folks from Treasury. And our pitch was this, and we even brought examples of streets where there were 2 houses vacant in really bad shape, and the rest of the mortgages were intact, and we were able to tell them which ones still had mortgages, high probability they were being backstopped by the feds, and we said, if you don't help us take down these 2 streets on this block, there's a good likelihood that the remaining people who by the way, who are already underwater on their mortgages, are likely to look at that mortgage and do something that I find, I'm 60, and if somebody told me in my lifetime that people would walk away from a mortgage as easily as you would walk away from a bad meal at a restaurant, I would have not believed that. But people walk away from mortgages all the time. So our pitch was, help us take down these 2 houses, or these other properties are likely to go bad. Not all of them, but some. And it is a cancer. It'll spread. So to their credit, they didn't dismiss us out of hand. We talked for a period of months, and in September of 12, they said, you keep saying you can prove it, we'll prove it. And we'll see if we can find money for demolition. So we conducted a study, $140,000, paid for by 14 land banks in Ohio. And the study showed, sure enough, that when in neighborhoods where there were vacant properties, where there was no demolition, foreclosures, walkaways, the line went this way. Where there were demolitions, foreclosure lines tended to go down. It was a good enough study that they bought it. I don't understand it. A lot of Greek letters in there, and I'm Greek, and I still don't understand all those, all the formulas. Probably the same formulas they used to give bad mortgages on Wall Street. Any event, they gave us the go-ahead, and in June of 13, they said, we will allow you to use foreclosure prevention money for demolition. In Ohio, got $80 million. The proviso was, though, only to counties with land banks, because they trusted land banks, and they felt, and there's a requirement that the property has to be held for 3 years. So there it is. It's for acquisition, demolition, and greening. Our share so far is $20 million. The county bond is probably not really a county bond. I know that Amy Budish is here, and it's actually, it's gone from being a bond to just being a commitment of the county to help fund this. But in the last year of Ed Fitzgerald's administration, we conducted a study that showed that the loss of property values in the city of Cleveland and the inner ring suburbs were impacting suburbanites in a way they didn't realize. There are 4 county levies that require everybody's support in Cuyahoga County. It's Tri-C, it's the Metro Parks, it's the Health and Human Services levy, and it's the Port Authority. So everybody pays for those. And what we showed in the study we did was that when property values plummet in the city, but also inner ring suburbs like Garfield, Maple, Warrensville, Newburgh Heights, East Cleveland, Euclid, when those property values decline, believe it or not, it eventually forces property taxes up around the county, because a 1 mil levy used to raise $30 million in Cuyahoga County. But when a mill only raises $25 million, the request goes out and they need what they need. They don't stop providing services because property values have gone down. It shifted $43 million in property tax payments to healthier communities in Cuyahoga County. And to his credit, he agreed, and they went with the bond, but he introduced it, and then he ran for governor, and then you know what happened, and it ended up being the county council that picked up the ball and got the thing passed in his last days of his administration. And a lot of the burden now has fallen on the new county executive to get this funded. And so far, about $25 million has been committed. But this is the one that I still pinch myself in the morning because I still can't believe this happened. But here goes. We've been partnering with people in Detroit and Chicago and Indiana, which has a lot of distressed communities. We knew the hardest hit fund money was running out. We guesstimated the problem in Ohio at $1 billion. As much as we appreciated that first round, we knew there was not enough to deal with this, so we had to look for solutions. And I have to tell you who's heavily involved with this. Dan Gilbert. Besides owning the Cavaliers and besides owning Rock Ventures, the gaming operation, Quicken Loans, he also owns a lot of Detroit. And he is committed to his hometown, and he is very close to the new mayor. So we had this group that met up there, and we said, how do we find more money to do this? We put together a consortium of basically 8 U.S. senators from the 4 states. The 2 senators here were amazing. Sherrod Brown was incredibly helpful with the administration, but Rob Portman was incredibly helpful with the people that control the U.S. Senate, who happen to have an R after their name. So this was, and so was Senator Kirk up in Illinois. So it was a multi-state effort, and on December 16th, we were able to shift $2 billion from a program about to close down called the HAMP program, and we were able to move it into the hardest hit fund, which was the fund that allows it to be used for demolition. That was the first victory, and we got the call the night of the 16th. The president signed it the 18th. And then there had to be regulations written. And then there was an intense effort led by people in Michigan, involving our office, to make sure that Treasury would write regulations that would recognize why this was done. This wasn't done for California. It wasn't done for Florida or North Carolina. It was done for basically states like Ohio and Michigan. So we helped to write regulations. To their credit, they thought they were a good idea, and they accepted them, that said, look at the following factors and allocating. So the first round, the first billion, was done formulaic. We got 97.5 just based on that, and that's going to be split among the 21 land banks now operating in Ohio. The second round was one based on formula that included age of housing stock, vacancies, foreclosure rates, and the ability of a state or a community to spend prior dollars. That one will make us eligible for an extra $250 million. So the total is $347.5 million. I got to tell you, it's the largest award in the country. We kidded about it. We were in a conference call, and yeah, we're thrilled. We were in a conference call, and the Michigan folks were on, and I remember there were probably 20 people on the call, and I shouldn't have done this. I said, once again, Ohio beats Michigan. And there was no laughter on the other end. What somebody said was not funny. Okay. All right. So how does this money come to Ohio? NIP, there's a program called Neighborhood Improvement Program. It provides you up to $25,000 per structure. They're not going to spend $25,000, but it gives you money to acquire it up to $5,000. The good news is we don't have to do that because the land bank is going to go in with the help of the county, foreclose on the tax delinquent abandoned property and bring it in at no cost, except for the cost of some filing fees. Demolition asbestos remediation runs $10,000 to $12,000 on average. But here's where the opportunity is. There's multiple opportunities in that 5,000 number. Treasury said, we don't want you to take this from a blighted property to a blighted vacant lot. We want to give you money to really beautify the property. Just don't walk away, green the property, plant trees, do fencing, do whatever you can to make this an attractive piece of property. We also think in this is an opportunity to hire people from the city, from the neighborhood. We're talking about hundreds of kids over the course of the next 3 or 4 years to be involved. Maybe not so much in demolition, it's dangerous, though other folks can be involved in that, but certainly the greening and the maintenance of these properties, because they will give you maintenance, 3 years worth of maintenance, because the land bank is required to hold it for 3 years. Unless there's an adjoining neighbor that wants it, or unless there's a specific nonprofit. Unfortunately, in many of the inner city neighborhoods, there are no neighbors next door that want it because there are no neighbors, or the property is tax delinquent and in bad shape itself. So let me just, I got 1 minute to go. Part of what we've done, we could have another program of it all together, is I'd love to talk to you about another one of the initiatives in our shop, which is Reforest Our City. There's an effort underway. We're doing it jointly with the Holden Arboretum. We're an amazing community in many respects. We found a way to fund arts programs, which I think are great. But I would argue, and Rich Cochran will do this better than me, that I think there's nothing more important right now on a lot of this vacant land than to replant the urban forest and restore the tree canopy in Cuyahoga County. It's disappearing, folks. It's disappearing in older communities like Lakewood and Shaker and Cleveland Heights because trees live for a period of time and then they die and you take them down. It's disappearing because the emerald ash borer disease, has resulted in thousands of trees coming down or needing to come down. 6,000 trees awaiting removal in Cleveland alone. It's a responsibility that is important, but there's no money in places like Cleveland. And I would hope that someday we can talk to Metro Parks into establishing a division of the parks that would take on the responsibility of working with cities and communities and replanting really the hundreds and thousands of trees. You know, New York has planted over 1 million. Very highly publicized, it's New York, and they have a lot of money, but led by Bette Midler and some others. But I think it's an effort that we need to pay a lot of attention to. So, okay, 35 minutes. Marlene, so do I take questions?
Yeah, before we do, I'm going to be passing around the clipboards. If you're not on our email reminder list, so that you will know what, you'll get an email about the different forums that we're going to have for the remainder of the year. Please sign it. And we've got 2 mics on either side of the room, and we'll alternate with questions. Okay.
We have one here.
Good
morning.
Morning.
My question doesn't really relate. Is this working? Okay. Oh, yes. Doesn't really relate to demolishing properties. I have a house in Cleveland Heights that has been in my family a very long time. It was my late husband's boyhood home. My son lived there for 10 years till last June. And I spent $9,000 fixing it up last summer and tried to rent it. Couldn't, then put it on the market. And I put it on the market for $40,000 less than I had previously advertised it. Dropped the price $7,000, still no buyers. And I have heard a rumor that there's a faction that is trying to depress the value of properties in this neighborhood in Cleveland Heights so that they can then later come in and buy them up cheap. What can I do to fight this? I just feel so powerless.
Well, I don't know about the rumor. I just can tell you that I don't follow the markets as closely as I did when I was treasurer. What is it north? Is it in the?
Near the intersection of Noble and Monticello, it's called the Noble neighborhood.
Yeah.
And my house is beautiful.
I'm sure it is, and I know it is, and that's the real tragedy for people like you who have done everything right, and through no fault of your own, today find that you own an asset that's depressed in value. Even worse than that, the land bank. When I was treasurer, the land bank was averaging one call a day from somebody in the city that would call the land bank and say, "We'd like to give you the property. We grew up in Glenville. We have it. We rent it. We can't sell it." Superior St. Clair, Collinwood. Eventually, the calls started coming from places like Maple and Garfield Heights saying, "Would you just take it? We don't live there anymore." So all I can tell you is, first, I'm sorry that you're not be able to get what you want. I'd like to think markets will recover over time. Part of the reason I focused in on blight removal is I think blight is a cancer, and it does spread. And for people, I posted something yesterday. I never used to do Facebook. I was told I have to do it for work. Rich says you have to be on Facebook, so now I use it some. And we talked about the story that Philip Morris did this morning about blight removal in East Cleveland. A lot of people said Cleveland should not take over East Cleveland. It's not their problem. They don't have the money. They have enough issues. And one of the points I made was, you think East Cleveland is not your problem, but it is your problem, because it's depressed areas on the borders in Cleveland. It's depressed areas on the borders in Cleveland Heights. And again, it's because the community fell apart, the community went vacant, a lot of stress factors there, and it just doesn't stop because this is Cleveland and this is a suburb, right? It doesn't stop at those lines. So all I can tell you is that I would hang tough, and I don't know about the rumor. I don't know who's depressing values. In the old days, people used to do block busting, but I think we're beyond that. So here's what's interesting. I know Kelly is here. Where are you, Kelly? Raise your hand. Kelly says, "Why aren't we fixing these houses up?" And I understand that, but I think part of the problem is I fight regularly with Jeff Johnson, not so much lately, when he says, "I need money for rehab." And I said, "Jeff, your problem is not demolition. It's not demolition. Your problem is that people who live in Glenville can now move to South Euclid and buy a house for $45,000. They can move to Cleveland Heights and buy a house for $50,000 or $60,000. That's your problem." And we were, as you know, the second most racially segregated city in the country. Everybody, people of color lived here, and everybody else. Now those borders, those boundaries, and the economic barriers have now been dropped because housing in suburbs and inner ring suburbs and the west side, values have plummeted. So you see people leaving these distressed neighborhoods. So I guess my point to you is the plates are still shifting. I don't know what's going to happen with that specific property, and I'm sorry that you're going through that, but if you really want to sell it, I suppose you can sell it at a number, but if you can afford to hang on, I guess.
Questions?
Yeah.
The news came that they're going to be tearing down the power plant on the lake right at the end of MLK, First Energy. Do you think that we should be tearing down that plant, or do you think that we should be studying it more to see if it could be repurposed at some point?
I don't know. I think I've learned not to pick fights that I don't know a lot about. I mean, I tell you what, when I see that power plant, I see this opportunity corridor, I thought, you want to create opportunity. I have an idea. Here's my idea. Take the Shoreway at Martin Luther King Boulevard and bring it in, and bring it all the way along the south marginal, and take the power plant and all the land that you would vacate, totaling about 350 acres, and make a giant park on the east side of the city that is not unlike Edgewater. I think that would create real opportunity. Not a lot of park space on that side of town. Edgewater is heavily used. I think you can do the same thing on the east side of the city.
Question here?
Yeah,
Hi.
sorry.
During the Voinovich administration, I was hired to get people to move back to Cleveland and to sell the vacant land owned by the city to builders. I couldn't get one builder to build a house at that time. What I'm very thoughtful about now is all this greening of lots after houses are taken down. Are we going to end up with a big owning a garden in Cleveland? And the second question is, why there was so much publicity about Jeff Johnson fighting demolition in his ward, Councilman Jeff?
And that's his right, by the way. And I think Jeff is very frustrated. Jeff has basically said, look, you know, a lot of these structures can be salvaged. A lot of these structures can be rehabilitated. And I would always ask two questions. With what money and for whom? I mean, you can't tell people you will live in this neighborhood because your parents grew up here. You can't tell people you will live here. I don't want to sound like a Republican, but I think markets will send people where they want to go. So if people can afford a home in a more stable area, why should you tell them, well, we'd like you to stay in this neighborhood or that neighborhood? So I think the problem, and there are a lot of problems in Cleveland, there's always been push factors, right? The push has always been the problems that the city faces. It's crime, it's bad schools, it's service, it's not enough, it's all that stuff. And now you've got this pull in the form of real estate prices that are incredibly affordable in suburbs that up until now had not been affordable. So you see populations leaving the city. They're staying by and large in the region. I know Richie Paparin has done some studies. They're just moving to either other neighborhoods in the city or moving to suburban neighborhoods. Not all the neighborhoods in Cleveland are dying. You know, my office is at 25th and Lorraine. I'm in the building above Crop and Penzies. I'm up on the 5th floor. That is a booming neighborhood. The land bank can't keep a single property there. First of all, because they only get it when it's tax delinquent, people pay the taxes. They make sure it doesn't go to the land bank. But if you look in places like Tremont and Ohio City and Detroit Shoreway and the areas around University Circle, they're booming. And I think, by the way, Old Brooklyn is going to be the next kind of Ohio City because of a variety of things going on there. And West Park is still strong. Collinwood, parts of Collinwood. So I think you will see nodes of strength in a city. But it's not helped by the fact that if you want to build a house in the city, you've got to jump through about 200 hoops. I don't know if you know what it's like to get a building permit in the city. It's very difficult. You know, I'm not that intelligent. I don't know what you do. Look, I would rather have a giant park than a giant slum, right? I'd rather have 30,000 trees planted on vacant lots than vast tracts of property that look somewhat like Kansas, right? So plant trees, do what you can to at least beautify the property in the hopes. I'll tell you what it does. We have studies that show that if you do green areas, it does add value to the property still left there, and there are multiple studies that talk about that. And the effects on human health are, without question, they've been verified. The trees alleviate stress, they alleviate dementia, they clean the air, they keep neighborhoods cooler in summers and warmer in winters. I could go on. Rich Cochran does it better than me. So.
Okay, questions?
Hi, Amy.
First, what I appreciated in your talk especially was often you spoke about coalition building, which that's a comment. It seems that's a real strength of yours. I was wondering, well, two things. Early in the crisis, there seemed to be a lot of conversation about out-of-town home ownership and flipping and the problems of tracking down ownership. You didn't mention that in your conversation. Has that abated, or is that still an issue? And number two, if population flight is an issue, where should we be looking for new people? Should you be building coalitions with New York, Manhattan, attracting people from Brooklyn? Should we be doing a marketing effort now?
Well, so that's a good question. Let's start with the out-of-town folks. The reason there were so many out-of-town buyers is because the federal government helped to put them there. When the initial round of foreclosures began to occur in 03, 04, and 05, for a period of years, those properties would be taken back by the GSEs, and they would be sold off in blocks of properties, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 properties. Investors would come in from all over the country and buy the properties, and they would cherry pick. They would buy all these properties, and they would focus on the better properties in more stable neighborhoods. And the properties in places like Cleveland, that's where you would see signs pop up saying, you can own this house for $500 down and $500 a month. What you didn't know is the buyer had only paid $500 for that property. So we did a study when I was treasurer that showed that on those initial flips and the subsequent flips that occurred, less than 5% of those properties ever paid property tax again. The one thing the land bank did, because it has now forged relationships with HUD and Fannie, is they have stopped that dumping of properties. And anytime HUD or Fannie Mae has properties now, the first place they go is to the land bank. The land bank is probably taking about 100 properties a month. I cannot tell you enough about how proud I am of that land bank. They're the best in the country. They get beat up because you can never please everybody, but they have done amazing work. So by and large, the new out-of-town buyers are gone. You know, it was so great. I remember when I was treasurer, I got an email from somebody in London and said, I'm concerned because I have 3 properties I purchased in Cleveland and one of them is missing. I had a daughter who was in an overseas program in Dublin. I had the overseas calling card. I said, look, do me a favor. I said, I'll call you. I know the time difference. I'll call you when you're available. Let me call you. I did. It was a doctor in London, 67 years old, bought 3 properties on eBay from a woman in Charleston, South Carolina, had paid $37,000 for 3 houses. Now, one of the properties was missing. It had been torn down by the city of Cleveland. And about a month later, another one of the properties went missing because that was torn down. So you had this flipping going on. By and large, that has stopped, all right? How do you attract people back to Cleveland? Well, you know, that's a question everybody's asking. I met with the suburban mayor, a young woman who's the mayor of Brooklyn, Ohio, right? So Brooklyn, same problems in Brooklyn. West side, inner ring suburb, property values have plummeted. They're getting nothing but tenants. The homeowners are gone. Very affordable housing in Brooklyn, Ohio, by the way. She says, I'd like to attract millennials. Well, so would everybody else. You know who's attracted millennials is Lakewood. Have you been to Lakewood lately? It is booming. It is just thriving. It's old housing and it's dense, but those commercial strips are jumping. And I asked a kid in my office, why do you like Lakewood? It wasn't a great response. He said, well, because I could walk to the bar and then walk back. So I'm glad he's not driving. So, you know, Marcy captured an interesting idea. So the amount of student debt in this country now, as you know, exceeds for the first time the amount of credit card debt. These poor kids have been burdened with outrageous debt. It is absolutely criminal what we've done to them. That's another talk. You can get somebody to do it. Marcy had an interesting idea, which is, what if we created a program? I don't think it'll happen under a Republican president, but think about this as a possibility where you tell people, if you move to these communities and buy a home, we will reduce your loan payments to 0 for a period of time, or really cut loan payments as a way of incentivizing people with student debt to come in and buy a house in certain neighborhoods. Now think about that for neighborhoods in Northeast Ohio, where you might say to people, if you come here and buy a house, we will reduce your student debt, and if you're there for 10 years, maybe we eliminate it. Now that's just an idea, but you got to get creative, because you have a problem, and that is that these kids are coming out with outrageous debts. And the jobs that were there when I came out of Oberlin College, there, you know, a lot of folks, as you know, because of the earlier issue, people retiring without enough money, they're hanging on to jobs longer. So the promise that these kids had that they would go to college and have a job waiting for them, so I think we have to get creative. I think there's a way to do that. By the way. I think I told Marcy that's an idea. I like that better than cash for clunkers. Remember that, the car deal? So I don't know. You know, we do some work in Pittsburgh. We're about to do one of these surveys in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has done an outstanding job in attracting them. And why is that? They've got really strong universities there. Carnegie Mellon has, and Uber has moved there. Google. It's a more compact city. Blight, but not nearly what we have. geographically kind of constrained. I know they get really mad because everybody calls something the new Brooklyn, but they call it the new Brooklyn. So I think there's opportunity here, but I think that when you go home, you should discuss that with Armand. First of all, I don't think it's just a city thing. Just so you know, this is no longer just Cleveland, right? So Cleveland Heights, as you know, Cleveland Heights is like the tale of two cities. There's parts of Cleveland Heights that are very, very stable, parts of Cleveland Heights that are not. Shaker has some of this. So it's really it's not just a city or a county, it's a regional problem.
We already have a Brooklyn, so.
You couldn't hear right. Yes.
Good morning. I have a very nice house on Belvoir Boulevard, just over 2 miles due north of here in South Euclid. And I'm kind of in a little bubble where I have 4 neighbors due to the unusual lot shape, but 3 of those neighbors' houses are in distress. One was foreclosed. It's been taken on by the city of South Euclid, so it's in good shape. The house directly behind me went on distress sale and sold for $25,000, 1/10 of the value of my house. But it's in the hands of a flipper, and he's fixing it up, and he's going to turn it around. He'll probably be able to sell it for market value on that street. But the house due north of me, which is an old farmhouse that needs demolition, went into foreclosure. It's been picked up by a young man that's hoping to renovate and build, but the old house has to come down. And my question is, can some of these funds be accessed for demolition by a private owner?
No. For the property has to be in the possession of the county land bank.
Okay.
It has to be a publicly owned property. And the reason the land bank has been established as the entity is because this was foreclosure prevention money. The U.S. Treasury said there has to be an element of a foreclosure prevention program in this money. So what they want to do is they put a mortgage on the property for 3 years, and at the end of the 3 years, they forgive the mortgage, ergo foreclosure prevention. And look, I just like the demo money. Whatever you have to do to get it is fine. So the point is, no. However, if it were given up because of back taxes to the land bank, and the land bank took it down, and then at the end of 3 years, they could transfer it to somebody else, unless it was an adjoining property owner. I have to say this, because I follow South Euclid closely. I know Sally Martin, and they were one of the suburbs that work closely with the land bank, and they've been aggressive in identifying those properties. Sally Martin is great. I think they have done as good a job as anybody in this region on dealing with these issues.
Hi, Jim. This is the magazine you want to donate to. Jim's in charge of, or close to. Anyhow, thanks for coming. I can answer the question for the house that wants to be sold over here. Contact University Circle and Cleveland Clinic. They are funding partial down payments, and sometimes it's the whole down payment, or some thousands of dollars toward their people, their employees, buying homes in the area. So that's something, I think if anybody has a home and they're interested in doing something, you really need to do the research. You've got to think places that you've never thought of getting someone help. Cleveland, to answer one of the other questions, bringing people to Cleveland, they do have a new, well, it's not new, it's a few years old, initiative. Jim, you know about it, Global Cleveland. Go online, Google Global Cleveland. And that's really good. They're trying to bring in people. And every meeting I go to, you get the local people. They will say, well, what about us? We need jobs. We need help. We need things. Yeah, we do. But right now, as you said, we're trying to get more, feet on the ground. The other, the greening, and Jim doesn't even know about this. This is a secret because it's just been in the works a couple weeks. We are trying to work with the land bank. It looks like a gift card to and from the land bank to the food bank. We are wanting to work with the land bank to authorize us to use their vacant land that they have in the land bank to grow food for the food banks. Now, you got your greening effect, you've got everything going, but again, this is new, there's no funding for it, but anytime you can do something and help and get it going, that's great. The other thing is that the city of Cleveland, and I think most of the other cities, because I'm with the SC 2019 for the mayor, and I was with E4S before, we were all entrepreneurs for sustainability. So there's a great program that Cleveland has that if you get an audit, and if you own any property, and I don't know what the suburbs have, but you can get an audit, green up your property, you get a 10-year tax abatement on the improvements that you've made. And if you are interested, next 2 weeks from today, at the Berea Fairgrounds, everybody should go. It's the Earth Day. So go, learn. There's all of this information I'm telling you about is there. And if you think you're donating your organs, you really aren't donating them just because you signed the card. So go ahead, Jim.
Well, the director of the City Land Bank is sitting in front of you. If you'd like some vacant land in the city, Terry will line for him to see you after the meeting.
There you go, Jim.
Yes.
Just a couple of comments. First of all, I'm a business person, and I network a lot. There is not a meeting that I don't go to where it's somebody in their 30s has come back to Cleveland. Either come back to Cleveland or is in Cleveland. And, you know, they're blown away and they tell their friends. So I think there's a drift coming here. Also, though, the land bank, it was my understanding that one of the land banks bought Acacia Country Club when it was trying to be in transition, and then sold it back to the Metro Parks, so that actually created the Metro Parks. I think it was the one in Pennsylvania.
I think that was TPL. I think that was the Trust for Public Land.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
or the Nature, it was somebody. It was
Yeah,
not.
but anyway, it was an
Western Reserve.
example of a nonprofit stepping in and really helping in the transition of a really valuable piece of land. So.
Look, it always pains me that they couldn't do that with the country club over in, was it Oakwood? Yeah. You know, what a shame. What a shame that the money, and a lot of people desperately tried to find the cash to pull that off. I wish the same donor that had done that, there was one donor that stepped up at Acacia could have done that. You didn't need any more commercial in that part of town. All it does, it's a zero-sum game, you know. You open up a shopping center someplace, it shuts it down someplace else. Part of it. Part of it. The school has taken over part, right?
Question is here.
Yeah.
Appropriately, you are working on raising property values by the demolition and all of the wonderful things you're doing. But I know that there's concern in some communities about the effects of gentrification as prices go up and people who have lived in the communities for a long time can no longer afford them in areas where it's been successful. How do we deal with the gentrification issue?
I always, when I'm asked that question, I ask, which neighborhoods do you know that are gentrifying in Cleveland? Ohio City? Okay. I think the neighborhoods that have, I see that, there's a few of them, right? It's Ohio City, some. Tremont for sure. Detroit Shoreway is mixed. You can still get a very affordable house in parts of Detroit Shoreway and I guess parts of University Circle. I know the Cleveland Foundation has expressed interest in exploring in the establishment of a community land trust that would deal with vacant properties that they would help to acquire, either land or houses that would be placed in the trust that always make those affordable on a going forward basis. That was a program here headed by by a woman named Marge Misak, and it's now housed inside Neighborhood Housing Services. So there are people talking about it. And I don't want to be flip, but I just wish there was more gentrification occurring because that would say to me that the markets are strong and people are rushing back in. I don't mean gentrification as a way of displacing poor because it's another issue, this whole issue of, I saw a study recently done that said that a couple things. One was that a lot of people who were foreclosed in the foreclosure crisis are not back in the buy a house market because they probably shouldn't have been the first time around. They're not ready now. So don't force home ownership on people. I know you have a question real quick. Home ownership at one time in this country, pre-1930, fewer than 40% of the people in this country are homeowners. We are a country, by and large, of renters, right? Now that changed with VA loans and it changed after World War II. The number went to about 60% and remained at 60% all the way through the 1990s, and then securitization kicked in. And we took it from 60 to 70%, 18 million folks, and a lot of those folks weren't ready. So I guess my point is we have to be careful about pushing homeownership on people that can't. And we also have to take a second look at tenancy and not disparage people who are renters. I'm in a big house. I want to sell it. My wife and I have talked about renting houses. I'm not sure I want to own a house again. I know you've had your hand up for a while.
Good morning. I'm here today because I saw the announcement that you were going to be here, and I said, great. Hoping today some answers, solutions for the problem. I live in the Ludlow Community Association, and we're more or less trying to keep our community whole. But I see institutional blight happening. I can only speak because although I live in Ludlow, I pay Shaker taxes. I'm in Cleveland.
Do you ever? You have the highest tax rate, by the way, in the state of Ohio.
I
Your
know,
neighborhood.
and but I just can't believe that we only have maybe like 1 or 2 inspectors in the whole 4th ward, Ken Johnson's ward. We have a community development corporation, and it looks like if you ever travel down Buckeye, it looks like the community development is sitting in the middle of a war zone. I've been in the area almost 7 years, and I almost want to go to tears when I go through there to go home. And I'm asking today if there's anyone in this room could offer some solutions, some regarding what's happening, because it shouldn't be. It just shouldn't be.
I have one. Let me tell you, don't know this yet, or if you don't, I'll tell you. 2 years ago, Denise Seaman, who no longer has the St. Luke's Foundation, asked us to work with her in the neighborhoods that the St. Luke's Foundation is committed to, which would include Buckeye, Woodland Hills, and Mount Pleasant. So we began there. We're now 2 years and about 2 months. And the first thing we did is this door-to-door inventory survey we talked about. The first one we did was Mount Pleasant. Did Buckeye, Woodland Hills, and Mount Pleasant. We surveyed every single property. And the first thing we did was, okay, how many fell into the vacant DNF category? There were over 1,000. What was shocking, and this isn't, it is what it is, and just tell you what it is, only about 400 had been inspected by the city. So our first job was to get the other 600 inspected and condemned, and that's happened. I think the number of properties that have not been inspected in that neighborhood is now down to relatively few, 40 or 50, and we're working on those. So at least those properties are on the radar screen, number one. Number two, we have worked hard to move demolition dollars from the available sources, some from Moving Ohio Forward, the Attorney General program, some from this neighborhood improvement program. I know we've been working with the county, and now with this huge amount of money that's coming through this NIP program. Of that $346 million, I think about $100 million, I know the paper said 80 today, I think about $100 million is going to come here. We should be able to remove almost every vacant and abandoned property in that neighborhood. And it's going to take about 2 to 3 years, but there's a meeting on Wednesday around vacant land and what you do with it post-demolition and how to take a problem and create an opportunity. So the program, a woman named Jackie Gillian, Kirby Broadnax, Jay Westbrook, this is 4 Cleveland wards make up this area we're focused in on. If you'd ever want to sit down, give me your card, we can show you what we've done. We needed to build the infrastructure, but we've got a head of steam rolling, and I'm telling you that this money that's coming in from NIP, I think over the next 3 years, we have to have it all spent by the end of 2020, but practically speaking, it has to be really spent by early 2020. I think can be a game changer there. Now, does that fix all the other problems? Does it fix the problems of poverty and joblessness and all the other things that have helped to really sink that community or sink those communities or really damage those? No, but we're trying to create some wins there where this money will be used to hire kids over the summer, get some neighborhood buy-in, and giving people a chance to decide how that property gets repurposed after demolition. But I know exactly of what you speak, Terry. I know that you know. It's probably one of the most distressed areas. I think the only neighbor that came up worse on our surveys was Superior St. Clair. So it's a problem, but I think you're going to see a difference.
We have time for 1, maybe 2 more questions. Now's your chance.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. Thanks for having me. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Very much for coming. There's a few announcements that I do have. First of all, next week is going to be all church breakfast. 2 weeks from now, there's going to be a forum, climate change, poverty, and who's accountable. You're all invited to the sermon today, service upstairs, and I will say that the offertory will be donated to the Western Reserve Land Conservancy's Thriving Communities. And last but not least, the evaluation forms that you found on your seats, if you take a few moments to fill those out, those really do help us to plan for future forums. And again, I'd like to thank Jim Rackauckas for coming out today. Thank you so much, Jim. And thank you for all coming.